Okay, welcome to Shake the World, the West Village, and the dawn of America's Latin Quarter. Now, during the time that I'm going to be speaking about, which was the village's lyric period, from 1912 to 1917, on the eve of the First World War, there was a woman named Adele Kennedy, who was known as the only guide to Greenwich Village. So I'm going to try to do her proud tonight and be a guide in that style for you as we dive into our nation's, our city's very first Bohemian, right here in Greenwich Village. So, the lyric period was a time when people could literally get off the grid, right? They could come south of 14th Street and get off the grid. They could go away from sort of the conventional structures of middle-class politics, morality, art, culture, and think of new ways of living, of writing, of working, of loving, you name it. It was new, it was the village. So what do I mean when I say the lyric period? Where are we? So again, this is Greenwich Village on the eve of the First World War. We are looking at the Salon, 148 West 4th Street, best known as a literary haunt of Eugene O'Neill. This photograph was taken by a woman named Jessie Tarbox Beals. We're going to see a lot of her photography this evening. Jessie Tarbox Beals was the very first published female photojournalist in the United States. She was an extraordinary woman. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her because we're going to see so many of her images tonight. So Jessie Tarbox Beals starts out her photography career pretty far from here, actually. She starts it at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904. And she gets there, and she's not even allowed to go to the fair. She got there late, and they won't let her in. But she, you know, not to be outdone, is finagling, is asking, is pleading. Finally, she just walks in. And she starts taking photos, and who does she see? None other than Teddy Roosevelt. So she does exactly what I would do, because I love Teddy Roosevelt, and starts following him around the fair. And she follows him around, follows him around, follows him around, wants to take his picture so badly. Finally, just to get her to stop, he invites her with him the next year to San Antonio, Texas, to photograph his Rough Riders reunion. And in the midst of this, she actually becomes official photographer for the fair. And remember, she wasn't even allowed in at the beginning. So this is a pretty stunning woman. So that's 1905. By 1909, she's in New York City. And by 1912, our lyric period, she'll be living in Greenwich Village. And so she will be friends with, be frequenting all of the places that we're going to see that she took photos of. So this was a very intimate portrait that she's able to give us, and that I hope this talk will show this evening. So the lyric period, that's an interesting name, right? So why do we call it the lyric period? Yes, we're talking about art. Yes, we're talking about poetry. Yes, we're talking about lyricism in life and in love. But a lot of people date this phrase, the lyric period, actually to 1912 because of Edna St. Vincent Millay. So Edna St. Vincent Millay becomes famous in 1912. This is the first time that the nation is really going to hear of her because she will submit a poem called Renaissance to the poetry journal The Lyric Year. So the Lyric Year is 1912. Now, this poem is a blank verse poem and it becomes very, very famous. My favorite words are in the very last stanza. She says, "The world stands out on either side, no wider than the heart is wide. Above the world is stretched the sky, no higher than the soul is high." And I just think that's extraordinarily beautiful. And many people in the world, in the village, thought that. In fact, Thomas Hardy said that in addition to our skyscrapers, the most beautiful thing in the country was Edna St. Vincent Millay and her poetry. And she will become very much synonymous with the village in its lyric period. Now, I didn't call this talk the lyric period, and I didn't call it I Love Edna St. Vincent Millay, which I could have, right? I called it Shake the World. Some of you may already have realized that's a reference to 10 Days That Shook the World. Jack Reed, full name John Reed, but best known as Jack Reed, wrote this in 1917. It was published in 1919. He wrote it in Greenwich Village. He went on assignment to what was then called Petrograd, is now St. Petersburg again, to witness the Russian Revolution and to write about it. It's known as one of the finest pieces of reportage conceived. And he wrote it on assignment for the Masses magazine that had its offices at 91 Greenwich Avenue. And we will talk a lot about the Masses magazine this evening. But this idea of sort of shaking the world, of shaking the moral structure, of changing the social structure, that's what we're doing, right? And so that's what we're doing in this basement right now. And certainly that's what our revolutionaries in Greenwich Village were trying to do in the lyric period. But thankfully for us, so John Reed wasn't just a chronicler, and here he is. So John Reed wasn't just a chronicler of all things Bolshevik, right? He was also a chronicler of the village and its lyric period, and he wrote a poem called A Day in Bohemia. And he says, "We are free who live on Washington Square, who dare to think as uptown wouldn't dare, blazing our nights with arguments uproarious. What care we for the dull old world censorious, when each is sure he'll fashion something glorious? Blessed art thou, anarchic liberty, who ask not but joy for those such as we." Right? So ask not but joy for such as we, I think, is a really interesting kind of answer to this question, which is what is anarchic liberty, right? Because this is a time of the revolution, of the Russian Revolution. This is a time of real social upheaval. So for a person who wrote this book, who wrote 10 Days That Shook the World, who was there, who was very, very good friends with Leon Trotsky, who actually, Vladimir Lenin, wrote the 1922 preface to this book, and it was beloved by Vladimir Lenin himself, and so on and so forth. And Jack Reed, actually, when he died, he was buried under the Kremlin Wall. He's the only American really to have been honored as a hero of the Russian Revolution. So, Jack Reed wasn't playing around. But this question is, when he says, "Blessed art thou, anarchic liberty, who asketh not but joy for such as we," that's a different kind of anarchic liberty than we're talking about with the Russian Revolution, right? So what does he mean when he's saying anarchic liberty in Greenwich Village? Well, thankfully, we can ask and, whoops. Oh, I'm sorry, that's my anarchic liberty slide. Okay, that's is this what anarchic liberty means? This is a photograph of the Liberal Club, which we're going to talk about more later in this talk, which was stationed at 137 McDougal Street from 1913 to 1918. The Liberal Club, people who are interested in new ideas. But again, is this anarchic liberty, right? You can dance if you want to, right? You can leave your friends behind. No. But this is the portion of our program called Ask an Anarchist, right? What anarchic liberty means, right? This, of course, is Emma Goldman, who lived at 213 East 13th Street for most of her time in New York City. So Emma Goldman defined anarchy in a couple of ways. Politically, she said it is a new political philosophy based on freedom, unfettered by man-made law, which believes that all forms of government rest on violence and are therefore wrong or unnecessary. But this was not just a political philosophy for her, and it certainly was not just a political philosophy in the village, it was also a social philosophy. Emma Goldman said that anarchy was a beautiful ideal, and that it stood for freedom from convention and prejudice, and that it allowed everybody to have their right to beautiful and radiant things. Right? So this is freedom of expression, freedom from prejudice, and freedom to live in beauty. So truth and beauty are really what I think that Jack Reed is getting at when he says, "Blessed art thou, anarchic liberty, who asketh not but joy for such as we." That sort of, in Greenwich Village in the lyric period, joy is a political statement, right? They're going to live joyously, hell or high water, which I think is pretty fabulous. And so, when we think about this question of truth and beauty, right? We're going to get to Max Eastman. That's Max Eastman writing about the enjoyment of laughter, right? Joy no matter what, joy is political philosophy. But they're all poets, right? And when we think about poetry, we think about Keats, right? Beauty is truth, about joy really make itself manifest in Greenwich Village in the later period. There were a lot of places that happened. My favorite is the Masses magazine, which was really the beating heart of Greenwich Village at this time. As I said, it had its offices at 91 Greenwich Avenue. It was on assignment for the masses that Jack Reed went to Russia at all. This was, in its time, the most avant-garde magazine in the country. It was publishing the work of all of our writers and artists in Greenwich Village. It was poetry by Edna St. Vincent Millay. It was poetry by Carl Sandburg. It was cartoons by Art Young. It was reportage by Jack Reed. It was essays on feminism by Margaret Sanger. It was essays about anarchy by Emma Goldman. You name it, it was in there. It was extraordinary. And it was giving voice to ideas, to forms of art that just didn't have a place in mainstream magazines at all. And this really gets going in our lyric here in 1912. And I know there might be some historians in the audience who are going, no, the masses started in 1911, get off the stage. And you're right, it did start in 1911, but not under Max Eastman's editorship. When Max Eastman takes the helm of this magazine, it's really going to change. Because let's look at it in 1911, right? Okay, oops. This is in 1911. You don't want to read that. I don't want to read that, right? That's boring. Okay, in 1911, this was a very high-minded socialist periodical. It was very strident, and even at 5 cents a copy, nobody wanted to read this, right? I don't see any pictures, I'm not into it, okay? And it gives us kind of a little bit of information about how to win a revolution. That is not how you win a revolution. Then or now, right? You gotta get people fired up, and how do they do that? This guy. That's Max Eastman. Max Eastman was many things. He was a doctoral candidate in philosophy at Columbia. He was the founder of the little-known but much-beloved Men's League for Women's Suffrage. And he was all around Village Casanova. Now, this is true. A biography came out about him about 2 years ago, 2017. And the author of that biography literally said about his book, he went, you know, this is mostly a story about sex and communism. Because Max Eastman was a lover, in any and all way. And you know, actually he fell in love with Edna St. Vincent Millay, and she wouldn't have him. Don't feel too bad for him, though. He did find many other lovers, but later in his life he got punched in the face by Ernest Hemingway, so, you know, it evens out, does it not? All right, anyways, this is Max Eastman, and under his direction, the masses goes from this, right, to this, okay, right? So, I call that livelier kinds of propaganda, okay? In fact, he said, we at the masses only like to publish the livelier kinds of propaganda. Because he was a fun guy, and he knew it. He knew that this sort of politics of joy was what Greenwich Village was about, and that the masses were not going to read the masses, right? That if you are publishing articles about free love and modern art and socialism and cubism and psychoanalysis, right? Like, you know, a dyed-in-the-wool Bolshevik is not reading your newspaper. And he knew that, and he said the masses was too laughing and singing an institution to convince a Russian Bolshevik offhand that it had really taken to heart the strictures of the revolution. He absolutely knew that. And the masses editorial board, which included himself as well as Floyd Dell and the artist John Sloan, referred to themselves as them asses, right? And declared that they would publish whatever they liked. They said, we publish what is too true and raw for a money-making press, and we will concede to and facilitate nobody, not even our readers. So take that. But speaking of art, you can see that art is really the lifeblood of this extraordinary magazine. Just look at these covers. Is that not crazy? And really it's the artists who get this going. In fact, John Sloan, who I said was art editor, he's the one who taps Max Eastman as editor. And the way that he does this is pretty fun. He just giant crayon writes, "You are elected editor of the masses, no pay!" Like, been there, dude. Right? You didn't know that the unpaid internship started right here in Greenwich Village. Now you know. Okay. Now, while the masses believed it was their duty to, like, find what was too real and true for a money-making press, so it was to find this reality and this truth, a actual money-making press, better known as the New York Times, said in 1917 that Greenwich Village was about one thing, and that was about cafes. The New York Times said that people in Greenwich Village make their living keeping restaurants for one another. And that was very true at this time and remains true to this day, and there were so many. I will walk you through just a couple. All of these photos are taken by Jesse Tarbox Beals. So here we have the Crockery at 55 Christopher Street. We have the Rendezvous at 158 West 10th Street. We have the Pepper Pot at 146 West 4th Street. We have the Treasure Box, 7 Sheridan Square. We have the Samovar, which we saw before, 148 West 4th Street. And we have this. This is Polly's Restaurant. And Polly's Restaurant was the heart of the scene. Now, Polly's Restaurant was so important to Greenwich Village that Jesse Tarbox Beals even wrote a poem over this photograph. You can see, when life is very strenuous and spirits are way down, you'd better go to Polly's in little Greenwich Town, for there the clans are gathered. It's there you'll find them all, the artists and the writers ranged along the wall. Miss Polly takes the money, and Mike says he just can't wait any faster on the folks in Polly's Restaurant. So Jesse Tarbox Beals was a better photographer than she was a poet. You know, we can't be all things at once. It's okay. But Polly's Restaurant was famous for being a gathering place, not really famous for food, right? The food was cheap and sort of simple, and that's what it was. It was good for what it was, but this was not Le Cirque. This was not supposed to be, you know, any Michelin anything. But it was supposed to be this gathering space, and there were two extraordinary clubs that start to meet here. This is at 137 McDougal Street. And when we think of McDougal Street in these years, we don't think necessarily of Polly's Restaurant. Some of you may, it's very famous, but there's something much more famous, right, on McDougal Street at this time. And the question is, what is it? Well, it's this. It's the Provincetown Playhouse, right? So, very sadly, I know there was so much sadness. I know that GVSHP itself worked so hard to try to maintain the Provincetown Playhouse. It was torn down in 2008. Too much chagrin, much sadness in this room. But this was the original Provincetown Playhouse at 139 McDougal Street. It then moved to 133. So now it has been revived by NYU. They knocked down the original building to create office space for the law school. Actually, we're going to talk more about NYU Law School in this talk. Don't get too mad. They did do some cool stuff in the 1890s. But when in its heyday, the Provincetown Playhouse was an extraordinary place. It wasn't just a theater. It was the cradle of modern American drama, right? It became synonymous with Eugene O'Neill, with Edna St. Vincent Millay. It even launched the sort of unknown acting career of somebody named Betty Davis. Haven't heard of her, I don't know. But it really was extraordinary in a lot of ways. First of all, it was pioneering in that it cast African American actors in leading roles, and also that it was open to women in every area of production and playwriting. So there were several women who actually founded the Provincetown Playhouse, among them Ida Rowe and Susan Gaspell. Susan Gaspell herself was a playwright. In fact, here are Ida Rowe and Susan Gaspell in Gaspell's play, Bernice, at the Provincetown Playhouse. And Susan Gaspell herself would win the 1931 Pulitzer Prize for Alice's House. so she was an extraordinarily talented woman. But there were an array of extraordinarily talented women on McDougal Street at this time. And Polly Holliday herself was one. So Polly Holliday is the namesake of Polly's Restaurant. Now Polly Holliday was an anarchist and a transplant from Evanston, Illinois. And so she really brought people together in this place. And as I said, there were two organizations that met here. So one was the Liberal Club. We saw that photo a little while ago of the Liberal Club. Again, it was founded in 1913, just above Polly's Restaurant, on the second floor of the building, 1913 to 1918, for those interested in new ideas. And it did not actually get its start in Greenwich Village. Just like Polly was a transplant to Greenwich Village, so was the Liberal Club. It actually started out a little bit further uptown on Gramercy Park. But it had to come down because it was proving very illiberal at Gramercy Park because in that location, club members would not allow W.E.B. Du Bois to speak because he was black, and would not allow Emma Goldman to speak because she was an anarchist. And so the club moved, and then in these sort of more liberal environs of McDougal Street, amid Cubist art and bare floors and wood furniture, you had the whole crew. You had Eugene O'Neill and Max Eastman and Floyd Dell and Susan Glasgow and Ida Ruh and all of our villagers together indulging in new ideas and sexual experimentation. And speaking of sexual experimentation, which was really part and parcel of this lyric period, in fact, Ida Ruh and Max Eastman, they were married, but sometimes, depending on where they were, if they were in the village while they were married, they pretended to not be married because they thought it was too bourgeois. And when they were elsewhere, like on Mount Airy Road, where they had a summer cottage, they would pretend to not be married because they knew that it would upset people. So wherever they could challenge morals, they would do so. But in any event, so there they are with sexual experimentation, so on and so forth, free love. And that was really the sort of guiding light of another group that met at Polly's, this time in the restaurants, every Saturday, something called the Heterodoxy Club, for unorthodox women who did things and did them openly. Now, the Heterodoxy Club was founded by Marie Jenny Howe in 1912, our lyric year. And it was sort of a landmark club in not only feminist, but also queer, lesbian, and bisexual culture, because while it was not required by any means that members be lesbians or consider themselves queer, many of them did. And it was a group of women, about 25 members strong, who debated orthodoxy in all its forms. So they were heterodox in the sense that they were unorthodox. And so they were unorthodox when it came to religion, to spirituality, to work, to sexual wars, to art, to politics. They would debate all of it. And so they would have lecturers come to help them debate and so on and so forth. And the women involved in this club are just like sort of a who's who of Greenwich Village. And some names we even recognize today. Like, for instance, Elizabeth Irwin of our Little Red Schoolhouse on 6th Avenue. She was a member of Heterodoxy. So was Charlotte Perkins Gilman, very famous for having written the yellow wallpaper in feminist landmark text. So was Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, the rebel girl. Elizabeth Gurley Flynn was so cool. She was an organizer for the IWW. She then became the very first female head of the American Communist Party. She was part of it, and so was a woman named Mabel Dodge. Now, Mabel Dodge is our next sort of like phantasmagorical figure in the lyric period Greenwich Village. This is Mabel Dodge. Yes. So Mabel Dodge was to New York City what Gertrude Stein was to Paris. Now, Mabel Dodge was a salon leader. She led the most celebrated literary and artistic salon in the country from her home at 23 Fifth Avenue. And when did she found it? You guessed it, 1912. And this was an absolutely extraordinary assemblage of people that she was able to bring to her home through her money and what Ansel Adams would later call her talons for talent. Yes. So she was able to bring just a group of 100 people a week would come to her home. It was that revered an invitation. In fact, it was said that if you got an invitation to Mabel Dodge's salon, that you could not and you would not and you did not turn it down. Now, the New York Times called her the guiding light of the 1913 Armory Show. This is the 1913. This is a work in the 1913 Armory Show. This is Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, and everybody had something to say about this. In fact, the New York Times said that it looked like almost anything other than a nude descending a staircase, and most like an explosion in a shingle factory. So most people did not understand this. His goal here is to look at the nude descending the staircase from a variety of perspectives, but this was a bombshell in New York City at this time. It's silly, it's sort of funny to think about it now, that at that time, we don't realize it, but people had never heard of Pablo Picasso. People were not aware of the European avant-garde in the way that we are now. So this 1913 Armory Show was the way that the American public became introduced to European modern art and the European avant-garde. And it was just an absolute watershed. And it was Mabel Dodge's money and her understanding of art and her support of sort of radicalism and art in Greenwich Village itself that made it possible. So who's coming to these salons? Okay, this is a packed house at 23 Fifth Avenue, and what's so funny about this picture is that you can see what she did here was so deliberate. So you can see that this whole room is white, right? She's got white walls, white furnishings, white linen, white everything. She's got white. And weirdly enough, that is her revolution. Now, the other revolution that's going on at this time, we've talked about it, right, is the Russian Revolution, and the color of that revolution is red, right? And her revolution is white, and the reason it's white is because it is her canvas, it is her background, and against this blank canvas, she can bring these extraordinary people and they can shine. And I think that that's just a pretty stunning way to think, that she's thinking of people as art, as people's lives as art. And to a degree, that's what was going on in Greenwich Village, that people were trying to live artfully, and truly they did. So these nights were the talk of the town. As I said, if you got an invitation to Mabel Dodge's Wednesday night salon, you did not turn it down because it was just so raucous. It doesn't look raucous because you can see this woman's wearing pearls, and you don't associate pearls with raucous behavior. But that was the point, that in Greenwich Village, Mabel Dodge liked to mix champagne and dynamite, she said. She said that everybody in 1912 was involved in revolution, and this was her own little revolution. But this is the original radical chic, right? This is, when we think about Tom Wolfe, right, writing in the 1960s about radical chic, this is the original radical chic. These were people with very rarefied pedigrees, right? These were people wearing pearls who were coming down to Greenwich Village to mix with people with radical ideas. So we had radical ideas and we had people with money to fund them. And that was a really serious situation, right? This tension of art and commerce, right? People making money, keeping cafes for one another. Well, you know, that's not actually how people make money, right? You cannot make money keeping cafes for your friends, though God knows many have tried. But where is this money coming from? Where is this sort of engine coming from? And the engine is Mabel Dodge's salon, because there are people who are coming to this salon who have not only the money to fund this art, but also access to sort of organs of the, that was such a bizarre statement, organs of the press, newspapers. Newspapers. They have access to newspapers that they can really kind of make these ideas manifest in American just in Mabel Dodge's Salon. So for example, Walter Lippmann was a journalist. He wrote for the New Republic. He coined the word stereotype. Now he was there every week, right? So Walter Lippmann is there every week, and one night he's talking to Emma Goldman, and the next night he's talking to Isadora Duncan, and then he's talking to the anarchist Big Bill Haywood, right? Or he's talking to Hippolyte Havel, who was also an anarchist, and coined the phrase Greenwich Village is a state of mind, right? And so as these villagers are getting to mix with, to interact with, sort of the larger outside world, their ideas start to leave just the environs of Greenwich Village and make their way through the American consciousness, which is pretty amazing. So it's from Mabel Dodge's Salon, it's from 23 Fifth Avenue, that ideas like free love, like modern art, like psychoanalysis are making their way into the American consciousness, and I just think that's completely stunning. But there were so many people. She was pulling people from all walks of life, and there were so many of them. And the things that they liked to hold forth on were so varied, right? Because you might have one day, you might have like Jack Reed talking about socialism, and the next day you might have Margaret Sanger talking about birth control, right? That she needed to actually organize her evenings into various theme nights. So she would have socialism night, you know, or she would have like free love night, which sounds more fun than socialism night. And this is real, she had peyote night, right? So, you know, it's like Isadora Duncan and like Marcel Duchamp dropping acid together in a mansion on Fifth Avenue, like, right? You know, that's why history is so wonderful that you absolutely cannot make it up. And also, people in the past are just like us. That's my favorite thing to realize in the past, that people do things that are just as silly, just as wonderful, just as crazy as we would. So if you had the opportunity to drop acid with Marcel Duchamp, I'm sure you would, right? And that's the point that I'm making, is that they did because they could. Okay, and the question you might have, though, is how is this possible, right? Like, how is it possible that in 1912, this is how is this possible slide. This is a spaghetti dinner at Grace Godwin's garret, just another village haunt at 58 Washington Square South. She was very famous for her spaghetti dinners. And again, why is this happening? How is it that in 1912, you had the explosion of the Massive magazine, you had the creation of Mabel Dodge's Salon, you had the creation of the Heterodoxy Club? Like, why in this year, why at this time? What on earth is going on? Well, I think in a lot of ways it's a tale as old as time, and in other ways it's not. But first I'm going to start with the tale as old as time section of how this happened. And by that I mean, what brings an artist anywhere? Cheap rent, right? So, as we know, Washington Square certainly was not always cheap, right? Washington Square was the provenance of the well-to-do for many, many years, especially in the mid-19th century. This is the Washington Square of Henry James and Edith Wharton, right? But by the 1880s, Washington Square is too far downtown, right? People are starting to move it on up. And what happens is that rents start to fall around the square because Edith Wharton puts it in such a wonderful way. She says that people are starting to move to the wilderness near the Central Park. And on that wilderness near the Central Park, they are able to build these grand and opulent homes that there is not space for in the village. And so that looks like, for example, this is Cornelius Vanderbilt II's home. This was on Fifth Avenue between 57th and 58th Streets. And it was demolished in 1926 to make room for Bergdorf Goodman. But you actually can see the fireplace still at the Met, so if you do go hunting for Gilded Age New York, you can find it. Right, and so once our beautiful people move uptown to their great manses, we now have the artists and the immigrant communities moving in. So this is Adele Kennedy, the only guide to Greenwich Village, in her Greenwich Village apartment, and Jack Reed also wrote about his own apartment, which was 42 Washington Square South. In his poem 42 Washington Square, he says, "Nobody questions your for morals and nobody asks for the rent. There's no one to pry if we get tight, you and I, or ask how our evenings are spent. The linen is crumpled but spotless. The windows are dirty but fair. Life is a joy for a broth of a boy at 42 Washington Square. So he's having a good old time, despite the somewhat rickety apartment he's living in. So Edith Wharton also remarks on this change, right? That we go from this very rarefied world of Washington Square North and the beautiful row houses fanning out on either side of the arch to this more Bohemian enclave. And she writes that the quarter south of the arch was almost uncharted and inhabited by people who wrote and others who had no desire to be amalgamated into the social structure. So having no desire to be amalgamated into the social structure really was a point of pride for villagers by 1912. And that's a really sort of easy end to the story. You could say, you know, and then nobody wanted to be amalgamated into the social structure, so they got off the grid like, no, right? But there's actually more to say about that. So I would like to dial it back even before 1912. I would like to go to the year 1890 and talk about how all this began, because I think that the year 1890 really holds the key to how the lyric period became such a sort of deeply fecund time in Greenwich Village, how there was so much ferment, so much art, so much political upheaval. So why 1890? Okay. So New York City has always been a city of immigrants. Thank goodness, right? Immigrants make America great, we know that. Okay. But 1890 is sort of special in that regard because the numbers are really quite staggering. So in 1890, 4 out of 5 New Yorkers were born abroad or had foreign parentage. So it was really the vast majority of New Yorkers. And not only that, the degree of immigration, the degree of people who were coming to these shores was so large that the Lower East Side was known as the most densely populated place in the world in 1890. And the reason that I mention that is because when we talk about the Lower East Side now, that's not the same place as they meant when they said the Lower East Side in 1890. Now the Lower East Side in 1890 was everything south of 14th Street, east of 3rd Avenue. Remember that Emma Goldman lived on 13th Street, and that was known as the Lower East Side. And the reason I mention that is because that means that Greenwich Village, as we understand it, as this sort of lyric period, as this place, was right next to what was then known as the Lower East Side. And this was not, these were not two sides of an iron curtain, right? That this was a very, very porous environment. So I've spoken already a lot about Emma Goldman in this talk, but the point that I want to make is that the immigrant community that was living on the Lower East Side, that was preaching anarchy or socialism, is really part and parcel of what drove this very deeply political awakening in Greenwich Village. Right? That you have these artists come from the Midwest, come from upstate, come from places other than New York City. They come to Greenwich Village for the cheap rents and the good food, and they are able to encounter modes of thinking that are totally outside of their own experience in, let's say, the Midwest, right? And the people that we remember as the Greenwich Village literati, as the radical intelligentsia, are the ones who wrote about it, let's say, in the Masses magazine. So we remember Max Eastman, we remember Floyd Dell, we remember Jack Reed, but where are they getting these ideas? And truly that comes from the other radical intelligentsia on the Lower East Side. Because the Lower East Side had a radical cafe society just in the same way that Greenwich Village did. Okay. So this is Schwab's Saloon at 50 East 1st Street. Now Schwab's Saloon was known as the center of radical New York. And Emma Goldman very often used it it as her return address, and Samuel Gompers said that it was the underground of the revolution. It was run by a man named Eustace Schwab. I know that actually the plaque for Eustace Schwab at 50 East 1st Street is the very first plaque that GBSHP ever unveiled. So I know that Eustace Schwab is very close to GBSHP's heart. And he was really a wonderful man. He was sort of the conscience of the anarchist movement, because a lot of people thought of anarchy as a violent thing, and he was not a violent person, and he did not condone violence at all, but he did condone poetry. And he would turn his saloon over as a haven for all rhymesters. He would give free beer to all poets, which I think was very lovely. He was part of the best known, but not the only, German anarchist singing society in New York, because there were several. And he was really the guiding light of the anarchist movement in New York. Emma Goldman said that at Eustace's place, that's where she learned to love literature. She would read like George Bernard Shaw and Walt Whitman and the great English and American writers. She would actually read at Eustace Schwab's place, and he was for her almost a father figure in the movement, which is pretty extraordinary. And she remembered, though, and the reason I bring this up, the reason I talk about this when I talk about the West Village, is that she remembered that on any given Saturday, you could go to Eustace's place, and you would see Russian politicals, French commutards. I want you to imagine Karl Marx a unitard, right? French commutards. Germans who had been smashed under the iron heel of Bismarck, and writers and poets and other literati, including James Huneker and John Swinton, who liked to come and hear Eustace's golden voice and drink his golden beer well into the night, right? So the idea that this is just kind of an organic radicalism in the West Village, it's not. The radicalism that they are embodying, that they are writing poetry about, so on and so forth, is a radicalism that they find around them a few blocks east. And for her part, and for the part of many of the East Side anarchists, they also come west, because they realize something that I already sort of mentioned about people like Mabel Dodge. Emma Goldman figures this out the most. She realizes that if she is only preaching anarchy in labor halls on East Broadway, in German or Russian or Yiddish, then she's only preaching to the choir, right? And so she needs to be able to speak in English to people who can not only hear what she has to say and hear it with a sympathetic ear, but who can disseminate it throughout a wider American public, throughout a wider range. And that's what she does. That's why she comes to Mabel Dodge's Salon, so that she can have a wider audience. So you have a very, very serious give and take, right, between the East Side and the West at this point before the First World War. And so that's a point that I want to make, that how is this possible? Why is there this incredible outpouring in the West Village of art and politics and poetry? Well, again, as we say, immigrants make America great, because there's so much being brought in. There's so much coming in to New York City at this time that it is an incredible amount of grist for the mill. And those two things cannot be separated when we talk about the lyric period. And one other thing happens in 1890 that I think absolutely no one else, maybe somebody else, I hope somebody else, but to my knowledge, nobody else has really defined as the reason this happened. And I would like to define it in this way because I think it is amazing. And that is NYU Law School. You're thinking, what? Don't worry, I have a reason, I promise. Now, this is the old university building. It was torn down in the 1890s, in about 1894. But before it was torn down, 1890 was a really big year for NYU Law School, because NYU Law School agreed to admit women to the women's law class in 1890. It was the first university in the country to do so, and that was a really big deal. That was unto itself a revolution, because just to put that in perspective, I'm saying 1890, Harvard Law did not admit women until 1950. Okay, so it was huge. It was a really big deal. And the women's law class was not actually part of NYU Law School to begin with. It was a certificate program. It was a year-long certificate. But within a year, in 1891, of the women's law class then were able to graduate with JDs in 1893. And the valedictorian of the women's law class was a woman named Cornelia Caitlin, and she was from Brooklyn. She lived at 64 Montague Street, Brooklyn Heights. She was valedictorian, and she said, she gave a valedictorian address, and it was why I studied law. She said that the law of the land does not privilege women in the same way that it does men. And women are going to have to organize among themselves to fix that, and to do so, legal advocates among themselves will be indispensable. So she studied law so that she could help herself and other women to raise their stakes within American society. And it was just extraordinary, and she was not the only advocate within that law class. The women of NYU Law School became the foremost leaders of the social movements of their time. So the way that they contributed to the suffrage movement, to the labor movement, to the child welfare movement, to every social movement of their time cannot be overstated. And because they lived and worked in Greenwich Village, they made Greenwich Village really this center of political activism that it, I don't believe, would have or could have been without their efforts. I'm just going to tell you about a few. There are so many more, but these early graduates of NYU Law School were among, I believe, the most extraordinary advocates the country has ever known. They were just unbelievable people. So this is a photo of the school. I found this because Kate Hogan, who was among that first class, 1893, she founded the New York Women's Teachers Union, and it was she and the Teachers Union who first coined the phrase equal pay for equal work, and it was their effort that to get equal pay for equal work for New York City teachers that sent that idea and that phrase thundering around the world. So that began right here. This is Jessie Ashley. She was the founder of the Birth Control League. She was an organizer for the IWW, and she was part of the, actually she was the secretary for the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She was also the lover of Big Bill Haywood, the big labor organizer. Define whoever you like. And she too lived in Greenwich Village. She was class of 1902. Also class of 1902, this is Isadora, right here, with the sort of the curly hair, kind of the braids, right there in the middle. So Isadora was not only a labor lawyer, class of 1902, she was not only jailed with Margaret Sanger while giving out pamphlets on birth control, but also she was head of the Women's Trade Union League. She's seen here in a triangle shirtwaist strike. Not only that, she was one of the founders of the Provincetown Playhouse. She helped Mabel Dodge to create her Salon, and she married Max Eastman, and she introduced him to socialism. So thank you very much, Isadora, for the Masses magazine. And then, class of 1907, this is Ida's literal sister-in-law. They were sisters-in-law because they were both law graduates, but this is Crystal Eastman, Max Eastman's sister. Crystal Eastman, I think, is my favorite person of all time. Crystal Eastman was extraordinary, and nobody has ever heard of her, which makes me sad. Now, Crystal Eastman, first she graduates from Vassar, then she gets an MA from Columbia in 1904. She graduates second in her class from NYU Law School in 1907. She becomes a labor lawyer. She is then the first female commissioner in New York State. She sits on the Unemployment Commission. Her report for that commission, titled Work Accidents and the Law, leads to the very first workers' compensation legislation in the United States in 1910. She then, along with Roger Baldwin, founds the ACLU. And it was originally for conscientious objectors against the First World War. She said, so that there will be something worth coming back to when this weary war is over. Not only did she found that, she also founded the Women's League for Peace and Freedom, because she was a pacifist, and she also helped found the Congressional Union for Women's Suffrage. So she was just extraordinary, and not only that, in 1923, so after our lyric period and after women get the right to vote, she was also one of the first original writers of the Equal Rights Amendment, which was originally proposed in 1923. So Crystal Eastman was just a powerhouse in every conceivable way. And then there was this person. This is Edith Mulholland. Edith Mulholland brings us back to the woman I began with, which was Edna St. Vincent Millay. They were married to the same man. Edith Mulholland married him first. His name was Eugene O'Neill. He's not really part of this lecture because between those two women, he's irrelevant. Sorry. But Edith Mulholland was extraordinary. So she was a socialite. Her father invented pneumatic tubes, which is essentially in this day and age like inventing Twitter, right? Pneumatic tubes are those weird like mail subways. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So her father invented that. He also was a founder of the NAACP, which actually had its first, was in a sense founded in the Henry Street Settlement. That's what they'll tell you if you go there. But had its very first public meeting at Cooper Union in 1909, which is pretty cool. She herself was a member of the NAACP. But when she was at Vassar, she would speak about women's suffrage and also socialism. And this was not allowed on campus because it was the president of Vassar was a man and didn't want women speaking about suffrage. So what she would do is she would bring her classmates into the graveyard at Vassar, and she would speak about suffrage from the graveyard. And there were so many people who were going to her lectures that the president was overruled. So the Vassar Votes for Women's Club was triumphant. And she takes that triumph with her to New York City. She will graduate, she will live in Greenwich Village, she will graduate from NYU Law School when, in our lyric year, in 1912, she graduates in 1912. And in 1913, she will become the Joan of Arc of the suffrage movement. Here she is, the 1913 suffrage procession. She leads it. She's wearing a tiara. She's on horseback, right? She is like the guiding light, right? And she had a phrase that she always said, which was, "Mr. Wilson, how long will women wait for liberty?" Right? And she said it every time she made a speech. That's how she ended her speeches. And she was just an extraordinary woman. Not only did she do this, but again, she was a labor lawyer. I spoke a little bit about Elizabeth Hurley Flynn, who also lived in Greenwich Village. Now, Elizabeth Hurley Flynn was arrested because she had started the Sacco-Vanzetti Defense Committee, and being on the side of Sacco and Vanzetti didn't work well for her in the same way that it didn't work well for Sacco and Vanzetti, right? It's the same situation. So, who should represent her in court? None other than Edith Mulholland. So she was just a stunning woman, and all of these women were, right? They were all so moving in what they did and what they accomplished. And the reason I mention them in this talk is that they all lived and worked in Greenwich Village, and the passion and the drive that they brought to labor organizing, to social justice, and to sort of political consciousness moved Greenwich Village and it moved the world. Without their commitment to the social movements of their time, Greenwich Village would have been a different place. That they were the ones who were living there, they were the ones engaged in this incredible sort of upheaval, but not only they, of course. You know, they, as well as Max Eastman, as well as Floyd Dell, as well as John Sloan and Jack Reed, that this was not, I'm not standing here and trying to say that it was only the women, it certainly was not, but I'd like to highlight them in this talk because they are so often not highlighted and they were so extraordinary. But the point is that these were people, both men and women, who challenged the social strictures of their time and did so with zeal, but also with joy. And that's why I think that there's such a wonderful thing to study and to look at in our own time, because we are in a very political time right now. As I mentioned, all times are political, but we happen to be in this one, so here we are. And the question is, how do you deal with it? And I think that they give us a really good answer, which is that you can be committed and you can be passionate, but you can also be deeply joyful. And with that, you can shape the world.